Hello, here we are again, and I'd like to continue talking about JQuery. And we're just going over our basic JQuery skills here. And so far, I've created a page with a button or a link, and you can click it, and it prints the words "Hello World" into the page. So, and we won't test it here, but we can see it, right? So here I've got, an element that you can click on. It's the link. And then when you click it, we're going to execute this function here, and the event object we'll use to prevent the default behavior of the event. And then we'll use jQuery's HTML function to print the words "Hello World" into the h1 tag, which is called title, right? And that works so far. But what if you wanted to take a value from a form and print that value into the field? Now, normally you really wouldn't do that on a page. You wouldn't want, to have someone type something into a field and then click a button and move it to another area on the page. I mean, you actually might do that in some cases, but that's not, that's not super practical in itself. Where it becomes really useful is that when we start working with Parse, what we'll want to do is we'll want to move data from the form into our database in Parse. So this is sort of, some practice in how you might go about doing that, right? Okay, so we're going to leave the parse part out, but the idea that we can get the value from the form and we can know when you click the submit button on the form, right? And then we can collect the data from the form. That's really important, okay? So let's give that a try. So let's talk about the form element here. So HTML provides a tag called form, and the form is sort of a grouping tag. So, you put other tags inside it and the form groups them all together, right? And what you do inside the form tag is you put form elements, and these can be various inputs and text areas and buttons and things. And when you have those elements in the form, if you click the submit button, the browser collects the data from all the elements inside the form tag. And so we have the form tag here because you might have input elements outside the form, and when you submit this form, it's not going to collect the data from the elements outside the form. It's just going to collect everything inside the form tag. So that's why we have the form tag. So how do you work with this? So you make a form, and then maybe you make an input field, and the input field is a single line input, okay? So I'm going to give this one the type of text, and you can make several different types of inputs. So I'll just make a text input, and this will be a single line. And so I'll save it, and then when we refresh here, you can see there's my input field, okay? So there we go, text, right? And if we want to access this with JavaScript, we'll add an ID name, and the ID name might be, like my input or something. Okay, so there we go. Now it's got an ID name. Next, let's do another kind of input. So a really common input type is called type submit. Okay, so the submit type is, it looks kind of the same. It's an input just like this one, and this is an input, but this one being type submit versus type text looks really different on our page. Let's save it and take a look. Oh, that looks totally different, right? You can't even type in that one, right? Okay, so type submit is special. Okay, type submit generates a button, and the button is special because when you click on this submit button, the form is submitted. So that triggers something in the browser that collects all the data inside this form and then sends that data somewhere, right? Normally the form has an action, okay? And the action is an address. Oops, I got character set there. I want action here. Right? And normally it's an action like, we could call a page called handle form dot, HTML or something, right? In our case, though, we don't want to go to another page. So, in this case, clicking the submit button is like clicking an anchor tag, and it will take us to this page, the action page, right? Whatever you've got set as the form action. But in our case, we're creating sort of a single page JavaScript application here that's going to run in the browser, and we don't really want to go to another page. We want to stay on this page, and we want to handle the form with our JavaScript. Okay? So we're going to leave the action off of our form, and we're going to handle our form with JavaScript. Okay, so how do we do that? So you'll notice here my form looks a little weird, like I got the input element here and the submit button here. I like to usually wrap these guys in like a paragraph or some other tag, and then that will break them up onto their own line, right? Because they'll be inside a paragraph, right? There's actually a lot more to styling forms and setting up forms, so I'm just going to keep this simple for now. So we'll just have the input type text and input type submit down here. And then there's my form there, kind of a little better formatting, right? Okay, so what are we going to do? So right now, if you click the hello, the click hello button, it puts hello world in here. What I want to do next is I want to handle the submit button. So when you click the submit button, I want to take the text here and put that into the H1. Okay, so how are we going to go about that? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to need to select this form element with our JQuery, okay? So in order to do that, the form needs to have an ID. So let's give it an ID name, and we'll call it, my form, okay? And so we'll use that selector down here, my form, and then the form has a special action called submit. And you can bind and use other methods to add this event to the form. jQuery provides a helper method called submit. This is kind of like click. Okay, so we'll just say, submit. And just like click, the submit action takes a function, okay, that will be executed when you submit the form. And you'll be submitting the form when you click the submit button, okay? And just like the click function, the submit, or I should call this function a handler also, right? Just like the click handler here, our submit handler, it can receive an event object that describes the event that just occurred. Okay? So when you submit this form, this event tells us, what form it is and some other information. And in our case, when we submit a form, the browser will want to reload the page, which will cause us problems because it'll reset our JavaScript. So we want to do the same thing I talked about in the last video, where we call event.preventDefault. Okay? So I want to prevent the default behavior of the form, right, of submitting the form, which is to reload the page or go to another page. Let's prevent that. And then let's handle our form, with JavaScript, okay? So in this one, we'll add an extra line of code in here. And what I want to do is I want to first get the value from the input field here. So if you remember, our input field is called myInput, okay? So I'll say, let's make a variable here to hold the value from the field. Okay, so a variable is sort of like a container that lets us store information and give it a name, right? So we'll make up a name here. Let's call it, how about text input equals, and we'll use jQuery to get the value from the form, from this input. So we'll select this, my input field here, like this, right? My input. And then if we say .val, and you have to have the parentheses on the end. So this .val gives us the value of the input field. And the value is what you typed into the field. Okay? So, my input.val, and then if I typed, hello world into the field, then the text input here would be a string hello world. Okay? So once we've got this string in this variable here, then we can print it into the title and using the same method that we did earlier. So we'll just type it all from scratch, right? So we want to say, ID title dot HTML equals text input. Okay? And there we go. So now submitting the form, the first thing we'll do is we'll prevent the default behavior of that submit event. So that will prevent the browser from reloading the page. Then we'll go find the element with the ID name myInput and then get its value. And the val, this only works on form elements. So other elements you can't use val on. You'll have to use other functions to get their text, right? But for form elements you can use .val, and that'll give us the value that was typed into the form field here. And then we'll call $, select this element by its ID name, title, and then set its inner HTML to the text input that came from the form field. So let's give that a try. So we'll have to refresh our page here to make sure it reloads our JavaScript. And then I'll type in I like lunch. And then I'll click the submit button and it says I like lunch at the top here. And then we can still click this one to do hello world, but I like lunch better than hello world. But anyway, so there you go. There's a simple example using jQuery. And again, clicking the submit button to move the text from here to here, could be practical for some circumstances, like you're filling out a form and you want to, confirm what people are saying, like, oh, here's your, please confirm your email or whatever, that could work. Again, maybe this isn't super practical for all situations, but this will be applied directly to how we work with Parse. We'll be doing all of these things. We'll want to click an element and prevent the default behavior. Submit a form, prevent the default behavior, get the text input from one of the form elements, and then move it somewhere else. Okay? It really will be sending it to Parse maybe at this stage, and then we'll be using this to load the data from Parse and print it on the page. Okay? So these are just very basic jQuery moves that you should have this down and memorized. Okay? So thanks for watching. I hope that's helpful.